Welcome to Too Fond of Books. My name is Janelle and this is a reading roundup. This is the first reading roundup I've done since the end of June because all the ones I did in July were for Jane Austen July. So I've got a good stack of books in front of me here, and so let's just dive right into it. The first book I read, and this feels like it was a long time ago, but I did read it in July, is Village School by Miss Reed. I joined in on the read-along that is hosted by Kate Howe, Rainy Day Reads, and Angie from Literary Labors. And I love Miss Reed, so it was really fun to read this book and then to join in the discussion on the live show. It was really fun. This is the Fairacre read-along, and I'm going to include a link to the live show here in the cards and in the description below if you want to watch that discussion, because it was really fun to talk about this book. It was written in 1955 and it's just the first book in that series where we're introduced to the village of Fairacre and a lot of its inhabitants. And this first one is about the school, so most of it was focused on the teachers and the students and the things that they got up to during one school year. And it was just really delightful. And then another book that I read as a group read, I'm in a group that we are reading mysteries together, again with Kate Howe, and this is the next in the Molly Murphy series, In Like Flynn by Rhys Bowen. This is a series that is set in New York in the early 1900s, and Molly Murphy is an immigrant from Ireland, and she has decided to take up being a private detective, and she's okay at it, but she's not great, but she is young, and in this one she actually gets sent, Daniel, who is a detective on the police force, asks her to go to this house upstate. I think it's upstate. It's on the Hudson River, and the house has guests who are these sisters who claim to be psychics. He believes they're fake and he wants them caught. So he's sending Molly into the house. She is pretending to be a cousin from Ireland that the homeowner has never met before. This house, however, is a house in grief because a few years before, their son was kidnapped and lost, and it was this sensational case and he had been killed. And so the couple, the wife especially, are hoping that these psychic sisters can allow her through seances to talk to her son. It very much had Lindbergh baby vibes to it, that kind of kidnapping. And it was pretty good. We get more information about what happened to Molly in Ireland that caused her to flee to the United States, and it was pretty good. There are some things in it that annoyed me, but for the most part, I enjoyed that one. A Jane Austen Encounter by Donna Fletcher Crowe. This is one of her Elizabeth and Richard mystery series. Elizabeth and Richard are English professors from the United States who are celebrating their 20th anniversary on a trip to England, and they are visiting all of Jane Austen's homes. And they are currently in Bath, and they are visiting the Jane Austen Center, and while they are there, they discover that a box of papers has been donated to the center, and it's causing a lot of excitement about what could be in that box. And then the director of the center is found bleeding one night on the floor, and then something from that box has been stolen. And so Richard and Elizabeth get involved. They move on, however, eventually from Bath, and they visit Chawton, and they go to Winchester and Godmersham. And so it was actually kind of fun to follow in the footsteps. And the mystery was okay. And then for the 12 challenge, which is where I asked 12 friends to recommend a book to me and I would read one per month. This one took longer than a month, but that's okay. And that's The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. Murder, Magic, and Madness at the Fair That Changed America. This was great. This was a non-fiction, historical, true crime. This actually won the Edgar Award for Best Fact Crime. This was a fascinating story because he's telling the story of the Chicago World's Fair from 1893 alongside the story of H.H. Holmes, who is a serial killer and they never found out how many people he killed, but it was, at a guess, it was quite a lot. And so the connection that he makes in this book is that H.H. Holmes had moved to Chicago and he built a hotel for the World Fair guests. And then, of course, he used the guests and the hotel in his killings. It was a really fascinating read, discovering how the fair was decided to be built in Chicago and the struggles that they were up against with building the fair and having it ready in time. And then juxtaposing that with the activities of H.H. Holmes. It was a really, really fascinating read. So thank you to Jeremy Fee, who recommended this book to me. There's a few things that I noted in here that I wanted to share with you. A woman named Strowers occasionally did Holmes's laundry. One day, he offered to pay her $6,000 if she would acquire a $10,000 life insurance policy and name him beneficiary. When she asked why he would do such a thing, he explained that upon her death, he'd make a profit of $4,000. But in the meantime, she'd be able to spend her $6,000 in whatever manner she chose. To Mrs. Strowers, this was a fortune, and all she had to do was sign a few documents. Holmes assured her it was all perfectly legal. She was healthy and expected to live a good long while. She was on the verge of accepting the offer when Holmes said to her softly, "Don't be afraid of me," which terrified her. Wow. Yeah, I would find that terrifying too. All right, more about Holmes. And this was a discussion about alienists, who were like kind of early psychologists. Holmes was charming and gracious, but something about him made Belknap uneasy. He could not have defined it. Indeed, for the next several decades, alienists and their successors would find themselves hard-pressed to describe with any precision what it was about men like Holmes that could cause them to seem warm and ingratiating, but also telegraph the vague sense that some important element of humanness was missing. At first, alienists described this condition as moral insanity, and those who exhibited the disorder as moral imbeciles. They later adopted the term psychopath, used in the lay press as early as 1885 in William Stead's Pall Mall Gazette, which described it as a new malady and stated, "Beside his own person and his own interests, nothing is sacred to the psychopath." I thought it was so interesting to learn that term was used so early. I had no idea. It says, "Closer at hand, a far stranger creature raised his head in equally intent anticipation. I was born with the devil in me," he wrote. "I could not help the fact that I was a murderer, no more than the poet can help the inspiration to sing." Interesting. We have some of the writings of Holmes, which has been it was really fascinating to read that. And then here's something about the World Fair itself, which before I didn't know much about. There would be miracles at the fair. The chocolate Venus de Milo would not melt. The 22,000-pound cheese in the Wisconsin pavilion would not mold. 22,000 pounds of cheese? That is insane. All right, continuing on with the fair. The official history of the fair estimated that 250,000 people packed Jackson Park on opening day. Two other estimates put the total at 500,000 and 620,000. By day's end, there was every indication that Chicago's fair would become the most heavily attended entertainment in the history of the world. That optimism lasted all of 24 hours. On Tuesday, May 2nd, only 10,000 people came to Jackson Park, a rate of attendance that, if continued, would guarantee the fair a place in history as one of the greatest failures of all time. It was fascinating to learn about that, to learn about the attendance at the fair and why it was up or down. It was really interesting. More about the things that people could find at the fair. Within the fair's buildings, visitors encountered devices and concepts new to them and to the world. They heard live music played by an orchestra in New York and transmitted to the fair by long-distance telephone. They saw the first moving pictures on Edison's kinescope, and they watched stunned as lightning chattered from Nikola Tesla's body. They saw even more ungodly things. The first zipper, the first ever all-electric kitchen, which included an automatic dishwasher, and a box purporting to contain everything a cook would need to make pancakes under the brand name Aunt Jemima's. They sampled a new, oddly flavored gum called Juicy Fruit, and caramel-coated popcorn called Cracker Jack. A new cereal, Shredded Wheat, seemed unlikely to succeed. Shredded Doormat, some called it. But a new beer did well, winning the exposition's top beer award. Forever afterward, its brewer called it Pabst Blue Ribbon. Visitors also encountered the latest and arguably most important organizational invention of the century, the vertical file, created by Melville Dewey, inventor of the Dewey Decimal System. Sprinkled among these exhibits were novelties of all kinds. A locomotive made of spooled silk, a suspension bridge built out of Kirk's soap, a giant map of the United States made of pickles. Awesome. Prune makers sent along a full-scale knight on horseback sculpted out of prunes, and the Avery salt mines of Louisiana displayed a copy of the Statue of Liberty carved from a block of salt. Visitors dubbed it Lot's wife. So again, more talk about attendance at the fair. The next day, only 79,034 paying visitors came to see the fair. 3 days later, the number sagged to 44,537. The bankers carrying the fair's debt grew anxious. The fair's auditor already had discovered that Burnham's department had spent over $22 million to build the fair, roughly $660 million in 21st century dollars, more than twice the amount originally planned. Wow. All right, just a couple more here, things that I found interesting. So towards the end, when Holmes is in jail, he's been captured for fraud, actually, not even murder to begin with. Holmes's cell was furnished with a bed, a stool, and a writing table upon which he composed his memoir. He had begun it, he said, the preceding winter, to be exact, on December 3rd, 1894. He opened the memoir as if it were a fable. Come with me, if you will, to a tiny, quiet New England village, nestling among the picturesquely rugged hills of New Hampshire. Here, in the year 1861, I, Herman W. Mudgett, the author of these pages, was born. That the first years of my life were different from those of any other ordinary country-bred boy, I have no reason to think. The dates and places were correct. His description of his boyhood as a typical country idol was most certainly a fabrication. It is one of the defining characteristics of psychopaths that as children they lied at will, exhibited unusual cruelty to animals and other children, and often engaged in acts of vandalism, with arson an especially favored act. It's interesting to read, from his perspective, what things are like. And then at the end, Holmes, he finishes his memoir and he did get it published. Holmes's memoir reached newsstands. In its final pages, he stated, "In conclusion, I wish to say that I am but a very ordinary man, even below average in physical strength and mental ability, and to have planned and executed the stupendous amount of wrongdoing that has been attributed to me would have been wholly beyond my power." All right, so that's The Devil in the White City. Fascinating read. I read Appointment with Death by Agatha Christie. This was a reread for me, and I read this for Christie Fest, which is hosted by Lil from Lil's Vintage World and Julie the Hungry Bookworm. I love Appointment with Death. It is one of my absolute favorite Agatha Christie's. I also think it's probably one of the first ones that I read. It takes place in Jerusalem and then in Jordan, specifically Petra, which is a fascinating place. I'm going to insert a picture here for you to see because it is just such a fascinating location to set a mystery. Poirot in this one never actually goes out to Petra where the murder happens. He solves it from a different city altogether and within 24 hours. So that makes it a really interesting one as well. This one also has one of the best opening lines ever for Agatha Christie. "You do see, don't you, that she's got to be killed." So good. So I've already talked about this book before, so I'm not going to go into any more detail other than that I think this is an underrated Agatha Christie that I love a lot. I also read for Christie Fest a reread, The Secret Adversary, which is the very first Tommy and Tuppence, and I love it. It's a great fun mystery. I love Tommy and Tuppence. A lot of people maybe aren't big fans of Tommy and Tuppence, but I like them. My edition, this is a Panther edition from the 70s, and I love this, the marketing. A brilliant Agatha Christie recipe for a feast of suspense and excitement. Take two innocents in search of adventure, add an elusive young woman who holds a vital secret, blend in one faceless man with a blueprint for anarchy. Result, The Secret Adversary, a breathtaking story of international intrigue, a tension-packed race against time with all the authentic Christie ingredients of supreme readability, suspense, and ingenuity. I love that. And then I loved Agatha Christie's dedication at the beginning. She wrote, "To all those who lead monotonous lives in the hope that they may experience at second hand the delights and dangers of adventure." I thought that was great. I also noted this time around something that I've completely missed in the past. In one of her descriptions of Tommy Beresford, she writes, "Tommy sat down opposite her. His bared head revealed a shock of exquisitely slicked back red hair." I never knew that before, that Tommy has red hair. That is so awesome. He never has red hair in any of the depictions I've seen of him in adaptations. And so, yeah, so that was great. All right. I read A Botanist's Guide to Parties and Poisons by Kate Khavari. Sorry, I'm probably not saying that properly. This is a debut novel set in 1923 London, so this is a historical mystery. One thing that piqued my interest was that it's the main character, the investigators, were scientists, and you don't get a lot of that, I find, in mysteries. The main character is Saffron Everly. She is a new research assistant at University College London, and unsurprisingly in the early 20s she is meeting with a lot of resistance to her being there as a research assistant. There is a group of people that are planning a large expedition to the Amazon. Oh, and I should mention that she's a research assistant in the botany department. And then Mrs. Henry, one of the professor's wives who is going on this expedition, drops dead after drinking from her glass of champagne at this party. And Dr. Maxwell, who is Saffron's mentor, and she's his research assistant, he is accused of the murder, and so she gets herself involved. This one was pretty good. It was okay. It wasn't fantastic. She was a little bit annoying as a amateur sleuth. I also didn't find that there was a lot to remind me that we were in 1923. There was a little bit of discussions of people's experiences during the First World War, but otherwise I didn't really get this great sense of time and place. So this one was pretty good, but not great. And then I read the newest in the Rizzoli and Isles series by Tess Gerritsen. This is Listen to Me. Now this one was interesting because we got this is told from four perspectives. The detective, Jane Rizzoli, the medical examiner, Maura Isles, first person perspective from Rizzoli's mom, Angela Rizzoli, which I thought that was fascinating that we got first person perspective from her. And then we also got another third person perspective from a character called Amy. And again, this one was great. Jane Rizzoli is investigating a murder. Sophia Suarez is a nurse who was liked by everybody, and she was bludgeoned to death in her own home. Meanwhile, Angela Rizzoli is paying, really good attention to what's going on her street, and she's discovering that there are some weird things going on, but nobody listens to her about it, and that turns out to be a big mistake. This one was great. I really enjoyed this one. And I read Midnight at Malabar House by Vaseem Khan. Now, I'm not going to go into any details about this one. You will have to wait because this is one of my 5-star predictions. So you're going to have to wait until I do my follow-up video to find out what I thought about this one and what rating I gave to it. I will just say that it's historical mystery set in Bombay. The murder happens on New Year's Eve 1949, and India's first female detective, Inspector Persis Wadia, is given the case. And so you will have to wait to find out what I thought about that. And then last but not least, I finished The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. This has been 2.5 months in the making, and I was reading this along with Naomi from Naomi's Bookshelves, Christie from Christie Lewis Dostoevsky in Space, and Victoria from, I forgot her channel name, I'll put it on here. I'll link to all of them down below, and I'm also going to link to our live shows because we've had live shows every 2 weeks, and so our last one is actually coming tomorrow, but it'll already have happened when you see this. All right, I loved this. This is a French classic. It was written in 1849, I think. 1844. And it is kind of a classic revenge tale. What I love about this one is how complex the story is, and the fact that the author was able to write our hero, Edmond Dantes, who turns into an anti-hero, who turns into a full-on villain, and yet the reader has so much sympathy for him, for the Count of Monte Cristo. I find it was so fascinating. It was really well written. It was very readable. So, I mean, if you find classics daunting, this one was not difficult to read. It was very, very readable. This is the Wordsworth Classics edition, and I have no idea who the translator is, but I found it very, very readable. I loved this story so much. You can see I've tabbed it all up. So yeah, if you've never read it, give it a shot. It is a really good read. Okay, there you have it. That is what I have been reading recently. Let me know in the comment section down below if you've read any of these books. I would love to chat with you about them, and I will see you for another video soon. Bye.